It happened when I was a part-time janitor in the subway when I was a student. So, the job wasn't too dusty and easy. I climbed onto a scrubber, drove a couple of hours, and that was it. You can go home. The only downside is working at night, when everybody else is snoozing in their beds and you're plowing like a Cinderella. Even though you don't really work hard, and the head of the service also meticulously checks the quality of cleaning, making sure that you do not sleep. My area of responsibility was the 2 stations and the line between them, where I would sometimes go down with the maintenance crew to clean up the garbage and check if everything was all right. I was paid extra for that, and I gladly followed the instructions of the station attendant on duty. He kept a record of the time I spent on the line. That night, as usual, I wiped down the platform and was about to leave, when the electricians came up and asked me to remove the trash. They said they were changing the lights and there was something lying not far from the platform, in the technical tunnel. The wind from the electric trains blew it in, probably through the ajar gate. It happens that way. Go and pick it up and we'll go through the chiefs and make sure nothing goes. We'll beep if anything happens. I jumped down from the platform and wandered to the address, even though I was not supposed to be alone. But it was a technical tunnel, very narrow, with practically no one walking or driving. I was wondering how I could make it, because the tunnel was right next to the main line. I turn into the tunnel. I hardly roll back the heavy door, walk forward hunched over my shoulders, and after about 30 steps I bump into a tattered plastic bag from a fast food shop. There are times when garbage is blown in from the ventilation system, or the perpetually hungry maintenance workers themselves have eaten something and thrown it away. I pick it up, raise my head, and suddenly out of the corner of my eye, I notice a tall worker standing on the tracks, wearing a very dirty, greasy, strange-looking shirt, which I had only seen in old black and white photos when I was taking safety briefings. It was strange because no one was supposed to be here in principle. Even the repairmen come here once a year on their wild carts. And on foot it is strictly forbidden without a lot of coordination, tedious briefings, and piles of permits. Who is that? I got a good look at him, though he was about 10 or 15 meters away. He was large, thick black hair disheveled, sunken eyes, and it looked as if there were none at all, and a gray face with rough features and deep pockmarks and wrinkles. I could tell he was not old, though. He was wearing shreds of torn Kirzov boots. I wondered how they had held on at all, they were so torn. I noticed that there was some kind of badge on his chest, like an explosive sign. I had seen a similar one in the health and safety office. He looked like an ordinary man, but a slight chill ran down my back. I felt uncomfortable somehow. Suddenly, the worker slowly raised his hand and pointed behind me. I turn around and see with horror that a repair trolley is rushing toward me from the corner. It's a small but heavy red thing on wheels, with a siren and yellow lights, which used to be used by all kinds of subway maintenance workers. Nowadays, such rarities have long been out of use, but for some reason they are on the books and are not disposed of. And it rides very fast, indignantly humming the signal. But there's nothing to honk about. You can't stop at that speed anyway. I rush up from my seat and barely have time to stick my body in a completely accidental safety pocket, which is the name of the cavity in the wall, so as not to smear it, and the wagon rushes past with a noise and squeak, right where this worker was standing. And braking, it disappears around the corner in a pile of sparks. I wasn't hit, but only by the wind. By the way, the trolley driver later wrote in his explanatory notes that I jumped up and, turning beautifully in the air half a meter from the trolley's bump, dove headfirst into the shelter. It could very well have been such a circus act, but I don't remember exactly. I couldn't catch my breath for a minute, my nose pressed against the concrete wall. Well, I think I might shit myself or stutter. I remembered the shaggy man who had warned me. Obviously ran over a man, he stood on the rails, there is no pocket, and dodge will not work. It's too cramped. I run up there, but I find nothing, no blood, no crushed bones, as if there was no one. And that shit truck didn't even stop. It buzzed and whizzed by and dissolved like refined bread in a glass. That's a bad sign. There might be another one coming. So I didn't tempt fate a second time. I ran out of there so briskly that my ears popped, and went straight to the electricians. Why didn't you, you dogs? Didn't you warn me that the trolley was coming? You vile bastard. And they're blinking their eyes in amazement. They say he's alive. They say that the man on duty gave the order to start the ancient wagons from the distant tracks, and we didn't have time to warn them. You ran away and the radio is not available. It must be dead. No. I've been tapping and tapping. My radio's dead. It's really dead. The same electric obozies are jumping around thinking it's over, Kutia Kompot, but you're not dead. One of them even started hugging me, breathing in my breath. I shoved him in the face with my forefinger. He smelled like a wet flea bag, and I was squeamish about manly caresses. It was only later that I learned that these contraceptives had simply forgotten to stop the traffic and began to call me. When the frantic wagon rushed past them and there was simply no chance of salvation, I emotionally yelled to them, there was a living weirdo and the only pocket was the one I squeezed into. I made some scary stuff to cheer them up, saying, look for it or you'll end up in the cockerel's corner like the beautiful ones. I'll tell the prosecutors everything, he said. Murderers, they'll be sure to pull you up. Then the officer on duty himself ran up. The driver told him over the radio that he may or may not have hit a man. He's shaking, he doesn't want to go to jail. And he doesn't want to be beautiful either. Let's go look for the body. They ingratiate themselves to me and apologize for almost sending me to the next world. I get indignant and show off, secretly hoping for a monetary compensation for the incident. We went through the tunnel several times, but we didn't find anything. Nothing at all. They began to stare at me and ask rude questions about drugs, drunkenness, and unscheduled medical examinations. I should have kept quiet, but I started snapping at them and calling them names. In the end, the case reached the highest authorities, and they sent a squad of angry nukers to deal thoroughly with all this debauchery as part of their job description. In general, the scandal was not a small one. The fact, I was in the technical tunnel without coordination, without safety briefings, without a security clearance, alone, which is categorically not allowed by all the norms and rules. The station master was reprimanded and heavily fined, and the idiot electricians were transferred to auxiliary workers. The trolley driver was recertified for exceeding the speed limit, but I was quietly fired. But it never became clear who the worker in torn boots was, in spite of all my efforts. He could not pass unnoticed. There were cameras and guards everywhere, and there were no additional passages. It was a dead end, and no strangers could pass through at night. It's a mystery. But nevertheless, if it were not for this creepy stranger, various flowers and grasses would have fluttered above me. Much later, I watched a program about the supernatural in the subway, and there they told me that from time to time the ghost of a worker who died in the 30s appears in unexploited places. They even described him as tall, shaggy, and covered in rags. Isn't that the one?